On 5 News, jailed for killing a schoolgirl. 15-year-old Paige Dougherty was walking to her Saturday job when shopkeeper John Leatham stabbed her more than 60 times. He's been jailed for life.
Today we see a monster put behind bars for the unthinkable brutal crime he committed against our daughter Paige. A beautiful 15-year-old with a full life ahead of her and a massive family and group of friends are left to carry on with her no longer here.
Also this evening, how modern-day slavery is thriving in Britain. Despite high-profile campaigns like this, police just aren't doing enough to tackle the gangs which traffic human beings. The children failed by the system and how more innocent lives could be lost.
Should MPs have the final say, Prime Minister?
The lady's not for talking. Theresa May under pressure over her plans for a so-called hard Brexit. And the 7-hour operation that saw this 5-month-old baby girl become Britain's youngest double lung transplant patient. Hello and welcome to 5 News. I'm Sian Williams. She was, says her mum, a kind and generous soul, a beautiful 15-year-old with her full life ahead of her. In March, Paige Dougherty went to buy a sandwich at a deli in Clydebank, but the deli's owner, John Leatham, murdered her in a savage and frenzied attack, then bought bleach to clean up and 2 days later dumped her body in the bushes. After he was jailed for at least 27 years today, Paige's mum said no sentence was high enough. But there is now one less evil man in this world. Peter Lane reports.
No hint of the horror to come as John Leatham arrives for work at his delicatessen. The CCTV evidence will prove crucial. Just over an hour later, Paige Dougherty, heading to her Saturday job at a hairdresser's, walks into the deli but never comes back out. She died in what was described as a violent and frenzied knife attack, suffering more than 140 cuts and stab wounds. This morning in court, her family watched as John Leatham was jailed for life with a minimum term of 27 years.
Today we see a monster put behind bars for the unthinkable brutal crime he committed against our daughter Paige. A beautiful 15-year-old with a full life ahead of her and a massive family and group of friends are left to carry on with her no longer here. There is no sentence high enough to justify what has happened, but we can now say there is one less evil man in this world.
Footage showed Leatham in a white T-shirt running to a neighbouring shop after the murder to buy bleach and bin bags. He was seen opening his car boot and in images not released for broadcast carried Paige's body wrapped in bags to the car before driving off, later reopening the shop to serve more customers and continue cleaning to cover his tracks. He dumped Paige's body in woodland less than a mile away and later claimed that he lashed out because she threatened to accuse him of sexual assault if he didn't give her a job. The judge said the story was unfounded and the murder inexplicable.
What you did was truly reprehensible. It is impossible to comprehend how an apparently happily married man with a young child who's running a successful business is capable of such an horrific level of violence.
As she finished, Leatham was led away to shouts of beast and monster from the public gallery. Paige Dougherty described in court as a defenceless child and by her family as a kind and generous soul. Peter Lane, 5 News.
Thousands of people in England and Wales may be being held as modern-day slaves, but the true scale of the problem isn't known because police forces aren't investigating it properly. The UK's Anti-Slavery Commissioner is warning that too many cases don't get investigated, with just 28% resulting in a crime being recorded. Well, Dominic Reynolds has been speaking to one man who was sexually abused while being held as a slave.
Slave. And dog, give one bread, may not.
They would give bread to the dog, but they wouldn't give you bread.
For 6 months after he was brought to London, Dimitri's life was hell. At night he was kept in a shed crawling with rats. In the day he was forced to beg. He told me through a translator that his captors, a Romanian gang, enforced their power through rape.
He said that the first time that when they rape him, it was just to prove him that they are the boss and they can do whatever they want with him and they can use him as they wish.
It sounds like a silly question, but What did it feel like during that 6-month period? How did you feel inside?
Humiliating,
Revolting.
and ambition for escape.
You wanted to escape.
His captors are in jail now, but after he escaped from them, Dimitri was turned away from 3 police stations. They didn't recognise the signs of slavery. This raid last month in the West Midlands freed 12 suspected slaves. They'd been sifting rubbish for £1 an hour. The police were acting under the new Modern Slavery Act, but a new report says this isn't happening enough. In the last year, there were more than 3,000 referrals warning of possible victims of modern slavery, but police in England and Wales officially recorded fewer than 900 modern slavery crimes. That's just 28% of cases. And other forces are doing better. In Northern Ireland, 100% of cases were recorded. According to the Anti-Slavery Commissioner, accurate recording means victims don't miss out on justice or on the support they'll need. He's a former policeman. He wants forces to start seeing slavery differently.
It is an enormous crime and it's happening here in the UK. So I want to see policing responding to it in the same way as they do to other serious and organised crime like counter-terrorism, like guns and like drugs.
As well as this high-profile video campaign, the government says it's using millions from the aid budget to tackle trafficking abroad. The people who imprisoned Dimitri were also holding a 7-year-old girl that they'd trafficked. After the police rescued her, she sent Dimitri a picture. "Thank you for helping me."
Are you proud that you helped her?
Yes, yes.
Proud.
Dominic Reynolds reporting there on Britain's slavery crisis. Dozens of people have been killed in new airstrikes on the Syrian city of Aleppo. This video is said to be from the Al-Fadous district of the city. The latest bombings come as the US and Russia say they're planning to hold talks on Saturday, the first since the collapse of the ceasefire last month. Meanwhile, Russia has stepped up its criticism of the Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson after he called for protests outside the Russian embassy over its bombing campaign in Syria. Moscow said the comments were shameful and accused him of Russophobic hysteria. Hundreds of thousands more children in England are being offered the flu vaccination. The programme has been widened this year to Year 3 as well as Years 1 and 2. Overall, 4 million people will be eligible for immunisation. And 3 police officers have been charged with perjury and perverting the course of justice over the death of Kingsley Burrell in 2011. He died from a heart attack after being held in custody in Birmingham. The Prime Minister, Theresa May, has dismissed claims by the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn that her approach to Brexit is shambolic, saying what she's pursuing for Britain is an ambitious deal. Well, today in the House of Commons, MPs have been debating whether they should be allowed to properly scrutinise her strategy, though many want to go further and vote on it. Our political editor, Andy Bell, has been following proceedings.
Should MPs have the final say, Prime Minister?
There is one thing we know about the strategy to leave the EU. She wants to control it. But the Prime Minister was on her way to Parliament today, where a lot of MPs think they should be involved too, starting with the Labour leader.
This is a government that drew up no plans for Brexit, that now has no strategy for negotiating Brexit, and offers no clarity, no transparency, and no chance of scrutiny of the process for developing a strategy.
Of course, Parliament can have its say, up to a point.
First of all, the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union has already made 2 statements in this House. I believe 4 hours of questions followed from those. A new select committee has been set up, which crucially includes representatives from all parts of the United Kingdom, which will be looking at these issues.
The atmosphere of what's going on inside the Commons is all the more charged because some are saying what the MPs are doing is trying to reverse the verdicts of the referendum. So newspapers, for instance, this one says they should be damned as unpatriotic for insulting the voters. And this paper says MPs should be clapped in the tower. Labour staged a special Brexit debate today, but some of the most pointed comments came from Conservatives.
No offer of a vote and we need some clarity about the policy the government is going to pursue, because the government is accountable to this House for the policy it pursues in negotiation.
Many people in the country don't think that there is a policy to put the national interest first. They think there is a policy to put people's narrow ideological interests first. And what he should be setting out is quite clearly how we are going to protect British jobs and businesses and put ideology in the past where it belongs.
Giving this place full sovereignty free of Brussels was a big argument for those who wanted to leave the EU. But on this issue, the Prime Minister believes the voters in that referendum gave her, not MPs, the final authority.
And that Brexit referendum result was very clear, but implementing Brexit far harder.
Yes, Sian, because it now looks as if, as well as a tug-of-war between Britain and EU and Brussels, there's going to be a bit of a tug-of-war between the Prime Minister and a lot of MPs. Now, MPs today were saying, look, we don't want to overturn what happened with the referendum, but it is our job to hold the government to account on the way they negotiate Britain leaving the EU. And so a lot of MPs want debates, discussion and, crucially, votes. Well, I don't think they're going to get that. Talking to the Prime Minister's team after Prime Minister's questions today, reading between the lines, I think there could be a vote at the end of all this when the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed on the referendum, on the renegotiation deal. But what the Prime Minister is not going to do, if she can possibly avoid it, is give up in any way to MPs the kind of parameters of the negotiation, the red lines, if you like, how the negotiation is going to take place on crucial aspects such as access to the single market. MPs may push and push for that, but I think the Prime Minister is going to resist very hard.
Andy, thank you. Still to come on the programme. Why Donald Trump is hitting out again, this time at his own party. And the 5-month-old baby who's become a record breaker. All that and more after the break. Welcome back. You're watching 5 News. We've heard all too many cases of young children dying at the hands of their family or carers and being let down by the authorities who could have stepped in. Yet, despite repeated calls for action, the majority of child protection services in England still aren't up to standard. A report has found that 3/4 of services are either inadequate or require improvement. Catherine Jones reports.
It's 16 years since the murder of Victoria Clambier. 9 since the death of baby Peter. They slipped through the social services net, just like Kyra Ishak, Daniel Pelka, Hamza Khan and Aisha Jane Smith. But could it happen now? Today, a new report into child protection in England finds vulnerable youngsters are still being failed.
I'm extremely disappointed, and I think that children are being let down. The government has had 6 years to address this. They made a commitment that by 2020 every vulnerable child will have good protection around them. Quite frankly, with the report that's come out today, I don't think that's achievable.
The National Audit Office reviewed progress since the government introduced reform 6 years ago. It found a substantial rise in workload, with the number of serious cases councils have to deal with more than doubling in the last decade. But nevertheless, today's report condemns poor progress among council-run children's services across England, with 77% of services either requiring improvement or judged inadequate. And it also noted when social workers had a high caseload, poor performance was common. Councils say budget cuts and interference from central government are working against them.
Given the cuts and a culture where often councils get blamed instead of helped to improve, then some councils are struggling, and we think that the important thing is to provide services for children in those areas that are safe instead of blaming councils where failures happen.
Today the government said it is driving up standards, as keeping children safe from harm is an absolute priority. Far too often, after an appalling case of abuse or neglect, we have heard the promise that lessons will be learned, the phrase never again. But it seems much more needs to be done to make those pledges a reality. Catherine Jones, 5 News.
There's relief for holidaymakers who are planning to travel with the airline Monarch. It had faced being grounded because of financial issues. Now it's been handed a last-minute lifeline. Let's talk to Julian Drugler, who's with me. So, out of trouble, Monarch, but for how long?
Yes, it was looking really bad for Monarch this morning. It faced until midnight to get funding or face losing the chance to renew its atoll licence. That is the scheme that refunds passengers if a travel firm goes bust. 7 a.m, details of that funding came through, £165 million bailout from its owners, Grey Bull Capital. That secured its future. It ends so much uncertainty over the last few weeks. So obviously good news for holidaymakers and for staff of Monarch too.
It's fantastic news that Monarch has been saved, of course, for 2,800 employees and about 500,000 passengers with forward bookings. The big question, though, is why they let this go to the wire, causing so much stress and upset for passengers. They've now got to rebuild the Monarch brand.
And that brand issue will be the problem. The chief executive admits that bookings have gone down in the last few weeks after all this uncertainty. Monarch's big strength was in flying to North Africa, and clearly demand for those destinations has gone down with the terror attacks of the last 18 months.
Julian, thank you. Donald Trump has been hitting out again, this time at members of his own party. Numerous Republicans have withdrawn support for their official presidential nominee because of the tape of him boasting about groping women. But in an interview with the TV host Bill O'Reilly, Mr. Trump said he was now free of shackles and he was better off that way.
You know, we got more votes, more than 14 million votes, more than anybody in the history of the Republican primaries, Bill. And they don't give the support that we really need.
Okay,
now,
but I'm still
I think
confused.
I'm better off maybe without their support if you want to know the truth.
Well, Mr. Trump's comments on women have been condemned by Barack Obama, who says they wouldn't be acceptable for someone applying for a job at a convenience store. And he dismissed the idea that Trump could change his ways.
What did you think? He was just going to transform himself? I mean, I'm 55, and it's hard for me to change. I know at 70 it's going to be harder.
Now, she is still just a few months old, and to look at her, you would never guess what Imogen Bolton has been through. Not long after she was born, she developed an illness that affects only a handful of people in the world. It meant she needed a double lung transplant, but doctors were worried that her young age and her tiny size meant it wouldn't be possible. Thankfully, incredibly, it was. Minnie Stevenson has the story.
Now, Imogen Bolton may look like a 5-month-old without a care in the world, but hers is an amazing story, becoming the youngest person in Britain and it's believed Europe to have a double lung transplant. Only a few weeks after Imogen was born, she was rushed to hospital, suffering with a rare condition which left her struggling to breathe. Today, you can see the transformation.
I don't think there are any words. Thank you isn't enough. I spent 2 days after a transplant crying consistently because, and I say it and I still say it could have so easily have been me. It could have been me that lost my child.
Imogen was incredibly lucky. Her match came up within days. Then she had to undergo a complex 7-hour operation at Great Ormond Street Hospital.
They have to use magnifying glasses. They're looking at very tiny little lungs. If you think about the airways that are attached, they're about the size of a small straw. So stitching those in and making sure that they're stitched well without problems of leaking.
Now Imogen is home, healthy and happy. But her parents say they're eternally grateful. They won't forget while Imogen may have new lungs, another family have lost a loved one.
What they need to know is that part of their child does live on in Imogen, and her happiness and her brightness is what you can see shines through, not just from one child but from 2 now.
Doctors are now urging more people to think about organ donation. Imogen is proof that lives can be saved. Minnie Stevenson, 5 News.
The amazing story of how Imogen Bolton's life was saved by another child. Now, before we go, Matt has joined us to tell us what's coming up on 5 News tonight. Hello there.
Hi, Sean. Good to see you. I'll be finding out just how big the problem of slavery is in Britain by speaking to Anthony Steen from the Human Trafficking Foundation. We'll also be discussing that continuing row over Brexit and asking who should decide what happens next. Is it the government and Theresa May? Or should MPs be allowed to have a say when it comes to negotiating Britain's exit from the European Union? And with a film production company due to be sentenced after Harrison Ford, Han Solo himself, was injured on the set of Star Wars, I'll be discussing the issue of safety when making movies, Sean.
Look forward to that. Thanks, Matt. That is it for now, though. Sean Welby has the weather next. I'll see you again tomorrow at 5. Matt, of course, back at 6:30. Thanks for watching tonight. Goodbye for now.